Hello and welcome back to B-roll Redux. How's your
Hey,
evening, David?
hey, good morning, Dave. Happy almost was this
New
gonna be
Year. New Year's
Happy
already
New Year.
passed. Yeah.
Yeah, New Year's Palace, right? I slept through another one. I think I was in bed at 9 o'clock.
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah. It's not like when you're a kid and you enjoyed fireworks and stuff like that.
right.
Now it's just another day.
Just another day. I get
Another start of a year where it's like, okay, what
right,
4 months for taxes,
right.
12
What
more months until Christmas again. Like, ah.
what New Year's resolution am I not going to follow through on?
Well, speaking of resolutions, let's hope Hollywood has some good resolutions and follow through because they're
Oh,
going to
yeah.
need it.
They need something out there, don't they?
They need something, and what they don't have is a movie that we're talking about today.
Oh, yeah, nothing like this movie. It's
No,
a great movie.
Silence of the
Really.
Lambs, 1991. And I know we talked about the cheese in the 80s and 90s, but there were filmmakers during that time that actually were grounded, wanted to tell stories that are relevant and understandably grounded in like reality.
Hmm.
And they had fire with this one. They really did. It was based on a book of Thomas Harris. So it wasn't anything new. And there was actually a movie made before this that was basically based on the Red Dragon book.
Hmm.
So it was technically a prequel to Silence Lambs because Silence Lambs took place after Hannibal got caught and he's in prison, of course.
Right.
And that film flopped, and that was a Dino De
Yeah,
Laurentiis,
yeah, you know, yeah,
film.
the Watchmen, right?
Yeah, it had Brian Cox play, Hannibal, which I've never seen the movie, but his portrayal looked pretty spot on to what Anthony Hopkins was delivering. The
Right.
look, the
Right.
mannerisms that, of a highly intellectual person who is literally the smartest person in the room
Right, right. Well, that's
and
what
knows.
one thing that I was reading in the notes that Jodie Foster's character really respected him. He didn't agree with what he was doing, but he respected the Hannibal Lecter. Yeah,
And that
because
was
it.
a big theme throughout the movie was respect.
Hmm.
You know, uh, Buffalo Bill's character didn't have respect for himself, which led to
Right.
his, trauma. Then you did have slightly, subtle. It wasn't like straight in your face of how hard it is for a woman in a male dominated area.
Hmm.
I do love the fact that if you look at the FBI and Quantico, the scenes, it's like, man, 50% of the actors and extras were female.
Hmm.
So there was this, you know, trend of more and more, equality in this area. But when you get to those local PD, they kind of had those stares, who's this, Jack Crawford's character pulling the captain aside. It's like, it mentions like, let's not talk about the sensitive material in front of the woman, takes her in another room and he apologizes for later, but instead of making it like a hard point, she had that respectable conversation with them. It's like, hey, people are looking to you, for example.
Hmm.
And then, he kind of learned the lesson. It wasn't anything too preachy, which nowadays it is so much preachy. We would hear, you know, Jodie Foster's character say how hard it is to be a woman in this thing. She never mentioned that. We've
Right.
seen it, but that's not what defines her character. She is where she is because she deserves it, right?
Right. And they're hard work, and she just internalized the struggle, and it makes her a stronger person and a stronger character too. But not just to kind of let these things just fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, you've got to speak up. You got to speak up, but remember that respect, and that's how I always see it. It's like she wants respect, but she's not going to deny respect for someone else because she wasn't getting it right.
Hmm.
You
Right.
know, and it's just another example of how to make a strong female character.
Hmm.
And didn't have all those qualities that nowadays, when people are writing female characters to make them strong, they just throw in toxic masculinity. They write them
Right.
more masculine. It's like, man, she embodied everything from, masculine and feminine qualities.
Right.
The moment when she came out after seeing, Hannibal for the first time, and she got sperm thrown at her by that cellmate,
Right.
she cried, and that was real. That was a real moment. She did research with an FBI agent, and even she mentioned that, where it's like, hey, that is sometimes that is what's needed. You need to have that vent of emotion because of what you're dealing with. Get it out. Don't let it fester, right?
Mhm. Right. 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 Yeah.
Everyone did such a good job in this movie. They did so much research. They delved into FBI. They delved into going to Quantico, talking to, actual agents, and sometimes listening to, these videos and confessionals and serial killers talking, that, man, normal people would probably like develop, you know,
Psychosis. Right.
mental
Yeah.
trauma from
Right.
just listening to these accounts and stuff.
Hmm.
Such great movie, made
Right.
for $19 million,
Right.
made 272.7.
That that's a big chunk of change. Another big chunk of
Big
change
chunk,
on a
big
small
chunk.
budget. Huh?
And like I said, there is no reason why today we can't make things like this. Yeah, the cost has gone up, but even if, with inflation, you times that, 19 million by, three or five, you're still under 100 million.
Hmm.
And it's very capable of a movie. Even nowadays, I think Silence of the Lamb would resonate. It would resonate a little bit different, because of the Buffalo Bill character, which was always interesting because, there was a lot of guff saying, because he was suspected of being a transgender, looking to
Hmm.
transition. He tried to transition, but he was, denied three times by the three
Hmm.
major hospitals that do that. And there was a reason why, because, he wasn't really a transgender, you know, in himself.
Right.
There
Right. He
there
just
was something else
more.
in him that he was looking to transform. It wasn't really about gender changing,
Right. You
but it
said
was
more psychological than a need to be a different person. Right. Right.
right. And there was mention, because Lecter's character was explaining that to Clarice, but he never explained, why. He said there was a lot of systematic, abuse when he was a kid, but he never went farther than that. But if you looked at the very end, when um, Catherine had Precious, the dog, in the well, he went to go get his gun, and on his bed sheets, I saw that there was swastikas on his bed
Hmm.
sheets, on his
Right.
things. It's like, okay, that kind of makes more sense. He probably grew up, in a, you know,
Home full of hatred. Right.
nationalist, white supremacy kind of household, and he had all
Right.
that violence and that hate festering in him. And as he grew up, he wanted to get as far away from that as possible.
Right.
And that's how he tried to transform himself in different ways, but he was never successful. He can
Hmm.
never break that violence and that anger that had been festering in him. So it's like
Hmm.
everything was deep, everything was thought out. There, all those little details that put in there, all those moths that were in the
Oh yeah.
film,
Right.
they
Right.
some of them were flied first class. Yeah.
Right.
And
It was one of them was a Tootsie Roll and gummies. In case it got eaten, they had to eat it.
yeah, the dead body wasn't a mannequin. When you see a dead body, on slab when they're doing the autopsy, it's a real actor there,
Right.
and they had to have something in their mouth that they pull out. And it was like, man, I
Right.
was thinking that. It's like, man, so what if it's a Tootsie Roll and gummy? I'm more worried about choking that.
Right. Right. Hey, let's talk. Go back to let's talk about casting. I didn't realize that Michelle Pfeiffer was sought for the lead,
Yeah,
and then
Nicole Kidman as well. But
right.
Michelle Pfeiffer was their number one go.
Right.
And I think she would have done, absolutely fine at it. But there's something that I see in Michelle Pfeiffer that I think is more, uh, it's hard to put down, not more stern. Her eyes are always more hardened.
Hmm.
She has this very tough look, but I don't think she could have pulled off like the spectrum of the vulnerabilities. You look at Jodie Foster, especially at this time, she can have that look of like pure innocence almost.
Hmm. True, true, true.
And when I see Michelle Pfeiffer, she always had those eyes where it's like, man, yeah, those eyes have something behind them always.
Hmm.
But Jodie Foster has like this charm and innocence, but she can also be tough and
Right,
hardened,
right.
and I think it was only a blessing to this movie. Like I said, Michelle Pfeiffer would have been absolutely fine in it. She's a great actress, but Jodie Foster was able to nail that everyday person. It's like,
Right.
this is someone who's could could feel like she's over her head, but overcomes that, or it's like, this is what she signed up for, right? And it's so good. I love how the movie started, because they wanted it to start with the FBI fake
Yeah,
bust, in the
right, right,
training center, which had been done so many times. That's why they didn't really want to do it. But they mentioned have doing it with the training course, started with that scene. And I don't know if they went as far deep to realize the symmetry between it, but her running alone in the woods corresponds to how in her childhood when she was running
hmm,
away from the ranch with the sheep, trying to save the sheep from the slaughtering.
right,
She was alone in the woods for survival or for
right.
her survival. So it had that kind of symmetry that related psychologically to that character, which made it
Right.
so much
Right.
more
It tied the
poignant.
character. Right. Yeah, tied up the, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a lot of people for the casting of Hannibal as well. There's always like, 10 names that people want for a big role like that, but the number two from what I hear and from what stories and interviews was John Lithgow.
Okay.
In the 90s, John Lithgow was playing a lot more bad guys than he was before, Third Rock from the Sun, before he started getting known as, comedy,
Hmm.
Harry and the Hendersons and stuff like that, for comedy. He was playing in Cliffhanger. He was doing some other, sci-fi bad guy roles. Um, and he was actually up for the role in Manhunter, but Brian Cox beat him out, you know,
Yeah, I can't see
which
John Lithgow. I guess I only know him in the comedy realm, and uh,
I
but
mean,
I
in
really like
Cliffhanger,
Brian
he did an
Cox.
absolutely good job as like the big bad guy. But after seeing like Dexter season 4, he played a serial killer, the main bad guy
Okay,
in
I didn't
that
know that.
series. I could absolutely see him as Hannibal, but I think the right person got chosen. You
And it's
know,
one of those things. Once you see the character in that movie, it's like, how could they even think about anybody else? Because this,
yeah.
that guy just nailed it, or that woman just nailed the role.
And the funny thing is he was at the point Hopkins was, he was at the point of like giving up on LA. He was
Mhm.
trying to make it big here in Hollywood, but he just couldn't get his step in there, right? He couldn't get his foot in there. He was going to go back to London, UK, and continue the stage work.
Right.
But this movie made him into an A-list star.
Yeah.
I mean, this movie made, I mean, Jodie Foster was already pretty much a star at this point, you know. But this movie, was one of the only three movies, in history to win, the five main Oscars:
Right.
Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Actor, Best Actress. I mean, they swept it. And Hopkins only had what 24 minutes of actual film
Right. Yeah.
time.
24 film time. Right. Right. Yeah.
It was like only 21% of the movie,
Right.
and he won the award. So that shows it's not about quantity, it's about quality.
Quality versus quality. Yeah, true,
And when
true
you
statement.
have two quality actors playing a scene together, it's like that's all you need. You know, the scene where she's telling Lecter about, her running away from the ranch, and they were actually going to go to Montana and
Right,
film
right,
scenes with, with
right.
with the young actress that they already cast. We'd already seen a couple of flashbacks of the young Clarice,
Hmm.
but you would have to have a sheep. You would
Right,
have all, probably multiple sheeps because you probably would have shown her going in the barn, hearing the lamb screaming and stuff like that and trying to get them to escape. And that would have been a whole day's work, going to Montana, they were shooting in Pittsburgh, so it's like, man,
right.
you
Yeah,
had to
I
fly
didn't realize you
everybody
saw it
out.
in Pittsburgh. Right, that's my hometown. That's
Did
where
you
I was born.
recognize in the places?
No, other than just maybe the streets and the trees and the homes, uh, because that's kind of the neighborhood where I grew up. I could see Silence of the Lambs happening where I grew up. Yeah, the hills.
Yeah,
I
and
had,
that's always the coincidence. I mean, even the what Bellhaven, the where they find Buffalo Bill, or was actually like couple houses down for where Ted Levine, the guy who played Buffalo Bill,
oh
grew
really?
up.
Oh really? I didn't. Oh yeah, maybe I did read that. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
And he did such a great job. And when I first saw it in the late 90s, it's like, I didn't know who Ted Levine is. And, of course, I learned who he was on Monk.
Hmm.
He was the captain in Monk,
Hmm.
so another comedy role. And then it's like, oh, yeah, that is that guy. He looks a lot
Put the
younger
lotion
and
in
he
the
doesn't have
basket.
that mustache.
Right. It's one of my favorite phrases. Put the lotion in the basket.
Yeah, put the lotion in the basket. He needed that skin to be loose, right? I mean,
Right, that's just such a
just
creepy, creepy
and he
thing.
loved that dog.
Right.
It's another strange thing where you have like this little tiny teacup poodle or whatever it
Right.
was. You
Yeah,
know,
that's that whole it's that evolution of the that's a terrifying just
Yeah. And
it's one of
like I said, they all did the research. I mean, the Buffalo Bill's character was based on like three different serial killers, mostly of like Ed Gein or Ed Gein, who was the one that actually
oh
like, would cut the skin and make a human suit.
right.
But Ted Bundy, would lure, his victims by using the cast,
Hmm.
pending
Oh,
who
yeah, being
needed
hurt, right,
help,
right,
then use the cast as a weapon to knock him out. And that's how,
right.
Buffalo Bill did it. And then there was one other one, that they got using they kept their victims in a well, so
Hmm.
there was so much research done. Of course, there was a lot of research done by Harris, the book writer, because a lot of these details were in the book.
Hmm.
And of course, the film takes their own liberties where they have to, but nothing dramatically that changes anything that
Right.
the book
The tone of
represents.
the original story, right. I'm about to read the book because it's one of my favorite movies. I don't know if Maria's watched it yet, but she needs to watch it. The kids are probably old enough to watch it now. At least Audrey. Sean
Yeah.
probably won't. His favorite movie now is 21 Jump Street, whatever that goofy.
Yeah, we
You want to
talked
watch
about
that
that
again?
one.
Dan? No, I'm not watching that movie ever again. He's making fun of California. That's a great movie. Or back to.
Back to Silence of the Lambs. Yeah, I
Sorry,
mean,
I digress. Hmm.
the the, the characters were so great. Like I said, you only need them talking to each other to actually make it riveting, just because there was so much chemistry on there. And there's those old tricks, which I don't, people I guess would be too afraid to do nowadays, where Anthony Hopkins, I believe he was told by the director, it's like, make fun of Jodie Foster's Southern accent. You're
Hmm.
talking when
Right,
when he was saying his lines and he was wasn't being disparaging. He was being poignant, right? He was pointing out things, because she showed him a little bit of disrespect, and that's one of those themes. It's like don't show disrespect. It's about respect, right? And he mentioned that, and she got kind of mad, but she's an actress. You know,
Mhm.
she knows what to do. You stay in character, right? Then you
Right.
can then you can do whatever you want after that, bring it up. But, she might have been mad at the beginning, but later when she sees it, she actually thanks them.
Hmm.
And it's
Right.
like
For evolving that character.
you got to do sometimes you got to do that, and sometimes you want that authenticity. If you would have told Jodie Foster that he's gonna, make fun of your accent, it's like, well, okay, yeah, whatever, right?
Right.
But if you get her off kilter, that's what he was trying to do emotionally with that monologue.
Hmm.
So it worked. Sometimes you got to do that to get what you want. You know. All right, yeah. So I mean, there's so many. I love, like I said, the respect. That is a common theme on there. You know, the 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 cell, no, it's not the cellmate, but the person Miggs or whatever who's holding the cell next to Hopkins, he
Hmm.
shows disrespect, and Hopkins literally his Lecter kills him.
Right.
He doesn't physically kill him. He's able to apparently talk someone
Into killing
into
themselves.
killing themselves.
Yeah.
It's like,
That's a
why do you
power.
do it? Well, he showed disrespect to someone that he actually had respect for, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, right. It was a mutual respect for both characters. They respected each other. Not necessarily like what they did, but they respected them. Yeah.
And that was the actual reason why, when he gave that his famous,
Right.
where a census person tried to test him, and
Hmm.
that he was seeing that as an affront, as disrespect. And what happens? He kills the person,
Yep.
and I love Anthony Hopkins' portrayal. Like I said, you don't really see any other character or actor that actually can do that. But that the series Hannibal on NBC had Mads Mikkelsen as Hannibal, is like a younger
Okay.
version of Hannibal.
Right.
Before he gets captured and found out, he gives a great portrayal as well. And if you've never seen that show, I'd highly recommend it. If you enjoyed Silence of the Lambs and how uh crazy and in depth and different this character is, that goes even far into the character, and respect is basically one of his, or the main reason why he usually kills people. He
Hmm.
sees them as, disrespectful. You're not going to last long with Hannibal. If you show him respect, he's most likely going to show you respect, but he does have a tendency to play it loose with psychology. He's a therapist, and if you're his therapist, you're probably not in a good situation. You're
Right.
being manipulated, you're being tested on, and this was something that, he knew all that information about Buffalo Bill because he was one of his patients at,
Right. Well, the patients.
more
Right.
times. So he harvested whatever was inside of him even more. Um, and it is just such an interesting character, combination of multiple people, but felt unique on its own.
Hmm.
And everyone in, like I said, and everyone who played the FBI characters, John Glenn, who played Jack Crawford, did a great job. In the TV show, Lawrence Fishburne plays Jack Crawford, and he does a great job as well. Um, it just shows, I mean, there's so much research that can be done on this material if you're willing and able to handle it, right? I
Hmm.
mean, John
Right.
Glenn, you know, he he almost threw up one time listening to some of the stuff. I think John Douglas was the guy who Jack Crawford was based on, was showing him, and John Glenn was actually opposed to the death penalty before he did his research. After he
Hmm.
did his research, it's like, okay, there might be some times where it's like, yeah, it's like, let's get the death penalty going.
Right. Mm.
Yeah, and the production is so good. I mean, the choice of having the glass instead of bars in front of
Hmm.
Lecter's cell, what was just great, because shooting for bars or shooting for through fence, and it takes away from seeing the entire face. which when you have a lot of dialogue and pointed dialogue is just it's just key, and
Right.
it takes away kind of like the intimacy that they were having in their conversation. If you got bars in from there, half their face is covered or
Mhm.
separated, you don't get those reflections that we get in those scenes where it's like even though Jodie Foster's talking, you see Hannibal, his reflection thing, and vice versa.
Right.
You know,
And it's also, I mean, it kind of creates another sort of separation between the characters too, because there's no way he can touch or, I mean, I know he start when he talks about her perfume, doesn't he?
yeah. I mean, there's holes, of course, in
Right.
there for
But
breathing and
it gives
voices.
you more of a, la, a lab rat kind of thing from him. It's an interesting dichotomy of the choice that they made because it's that he's truly something wrong with this guy. Just
Yeah.
I think
And
it was a good
if you
choice.
had the bars, you would have that kind of cliche of like the guy putting his whole head up to the bars and
Right, right,
squeeze through
right.
there. And
Some of these all these tropes that have already been there, done that kind of thing. And I think it was a good choice.
yeah.
And yeah.
And the way that they shot, we get the great POV from Jodie Foster's character, Clarice, where we see a lot of POV shots of her eyes, but we don't see POVs of anyone else's.
Mhm.
When we get these POVs, like Lecter and John Glenn's character Jack Crawford would actually look directly in the camera,
Mhm.
which could be odd, but it isn't in this situation because we actually get that feel that we're
Right.
actually
Well, we already, yeah,
following.
right. They've already established it, so it's not as jarring as it would be if you're just, like breaking the fourth wall, so to speak. It's already been broken, but in a subtle way because we introduce the character as the camera, and the camera as the character through Jodie's eyes. Yeah.
Right. But then we'll cut to a quasi POV from another person, but Jodie Foster would be looking slightly off camera.
Right. Mhm.
Yeah, so it always differentiates. It always makes a note that hey, we're following her perspective and not anyone else's.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right, let's
The
take a
one,
quick little break and then
take
we'll
a
come
break.
right
Okay.
back and continue our talk on this movie.
Okay. Thanks.
And
Wow.
we are back and we're talking about Silence of the Lambs,
Down to the Lamb, that
1991
movie.
horror classic.
Right.
It's actually uh, it's probably one of the best horror films of all time.
But that's what I was reading. I don't consider it a horror film.
I mean, it's a suspense thriller,
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
but
I would say,
a lot of suspense thrillers are just are in the horror genre. They're not. It's not a slasher film.
yeah, I'm thinking Jason or Halloween. But when I saw that, I said I wouldn't consider that a horror movie. I
I
mean,
mean, we talked
suspense
about Alien
thriller.
before, and it's like, well, technically that's a horror movie. It's a sci-fi, it's Alien,
Yeah.
but like I said, it's not that traditional what we represent as horror as Friday the
Yeah.
13th, Michael Myers,
Right.
Halloween or Jason, it's those are slasher films, and you can even go as far as saying it's a what teen slasher films because it's
Right.
they're always going after like the young teenagers.
Right. Don't
Um,
forget the gratuitous nudity.
I mean, that's a staple, in most horrors as well,
Yeah.
especially the teen slashers, because, and we'll talk about probably this movie later on. There was that what Cabin in the Woods that was done
Mhm.
by Josh Whedon that made fun of that, where it's like,
Right.
if you want to survive a horror film, you stay a virgin, because the virgin
Right.
has the possibility of surviving
Right.
or dying, but they have the only possibility of actually
Right.
survive, right?
Right.
But this movie, it's definitely you have to consider it a horror just because the subject material. It's about a killer. It's about a serial killer. Um, you're dealing with terrifying subject material,
Right.
But if I would hard label it, yeah, I'd label it as like a suspense thriller.
Yeah.
You know, but being labeled as a horror film, like I said, it's the only horror film that's ever won Best Picture.
That's true, right?
So I mean, you got to keep that label just to show that, hey, yeah, I mean, it's done something that no one else can actually do.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting.
And the music was so great. I mean, Howard Shore did the music, and he's kind of like the Hans Zimmerman, where it's like, man, pretty much everything he puts his name on, it's usually really good.
Hmm.
He goes on to do what I believe he did Lord of the Rings. He did a whole bunch of other things. The funny thing is, you know, Laurinaitis actually owned the rights to, the Hannibal character to actually, to make this film.
Right, right, right. I
Because the
saw that.
Manhunter flopped, he didn't want to make it. He
Yeah,
literally gave the rights to Orion. He just
right.
gave them away.
That's crazy, right?
Yeah, and we talked about Laurinaitis when we were talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where his
Right.
studio was in financial trouble and had to be bailed out by the state. So
Yeah,
it's like North Carolina state, right?
yeah.
So it's like, yeah, if he had this movie, in his repertoire, it would have been good, but he might have made different choices, right? He
Right.
made different
Do you know who
choices
his daughter
on.
is?
Hmm?
You know who his daughter is? Gaida does that.
Yeah,
His granddaughter does that Italian cooking show, Gaida. Yeah. Anyways, I
interesting.
digress.
Yeah, I mean, we all kind of stay close to where we go, right? Um, well, like I said before, it's every little detail that they put in there shows through.
Hmm.
And anything that looks off or they do something like if you look at the bars when he's in the cage, those bars are so wide apart. It's like, well, yeah, you
Right.
did that because you wanted to see the whole face, of these people through there, but theoretically, it's like, yeah, I mean, he had so much room to like, I don't think he could have squeezed those bars, but he wouldn't had enough room to get so far
Right.
out there. He could have done some damage, right?
Right. Right.
Um, I can't express enough how much Anthony Hopkins, brought to this role. Like I said, 24 minutes of screen time, but it's such a memorable character. He is, I still believe is on the list of like, top 100 villains. I believe he
Hmm.
still is number one with
Oh,
him.
really?
And I believe Jodie Foster's Clarice is like number seven on like the top 100 heroes of all
Hmm.
time.
Interesting.
Yeah, it just shows, how well they did. They did so, so well, in this film that, we talked about how they didn't cut away from, having to do that flashback. It's just because they were just so riveting, just having the conversations with each other.
Hmm.
They're why cut away?
Yeah.
When you look at their eyes and then, Hopkins isn't blinking, and she's I don't see her blinking too much. You never hardly really do see people blink, in films because they usually, there's so many cuts and
Right. Right.
usage. But it's just like they were just so engaged and they, had eye contact with each other. They weren't shying away from, the eye contact that they had, just so powerful, just delivering lines.
Hmm.
I
Yeah. And
think
they
you were
really, like,
mentioning
again,
how Hopkins was coming up with the eye movements, right?
what's that?
How Hopkins decided not to blink,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Right. Yeah, watching reptiles and stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so something with how reptiles,
Only blink when they need to.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a we do it as involuntary
Right. Yeah. They're
thing.
definitely
Our
voluntary.
eyes get dry, boom. We
Right.
kind of moisten them or we protect them. Um, a reptile would do it actually voluntarily.
Mhm.
It decides when it wants to blink.
Now I'm thinking about blinking. It's like I can't stop blinking.
Yeah, now, yeah. I mean, that had to be so hard. I mean, how many lights are on a set, and there was a lot of lights on him quite a
Hmm.
bit because he was well lit for the most part,
Right.
and I guess that's purpose as well because if you have someone like that, you're going to want to watch every single micro movement that this guy does
Right.
for protection, so
Right.
unless there was that punishment where he was in the dark, but that was during late at night, but the guy turned it on, and I found that funny when his lights came on. What the first thing he does is he thanks the guy who did it, showing that respect. And
Right,
you
right.
know, uh, the director said he chose Hopkins because of like a previous role he did. He played like a different doctor, but he was a good guy.
Hmm.
And how the director put it is like, I chose it because, well, Lecter is a good guy as well, trapped in an insane mind,
Hmm.
which was interesting because his character does, like I said, he has that respect. If you are respectful to him, you really have nothing to worry about from him. It's just when you start to be disrespectful or being stupid beyond
Right.
human, capacities, he starts treating you less like a human, you know. And like I said before, if you enjoy, the depth of this character and enjoy the story, do check out the series. Even if you
Yeah, I think I
like a
started watching it.
food cooking,
I have to go
even
back and
if you like a
revisit.
whole bunch of food cooking stuff, he does a lot of
Right.
cooking in there. Not all of it is human.
Right.
But he enjoys, cooking and, fine dining, he had those pictures of like, Paris and stuff like that. They go deeper into, his mental palace that he has where, he
Right.
lives in his mind a lot because that's all he has left, especially when he's confined, is, well, he just protrudes into his mind.
Right.
Um, such great. I mean, I know they tried to do a series with called Clarice,
Hmm.
which unfortunately didn't do as well. And like I said, it's hard to get right. It is. They got it right in Hannibal, and the only reason why Hannibal series didn't continue on is because they were actually looking for the rights for Silence of the Lambs. Because they did everything up past the Red Dragon book. So they were hoping to do like the fourth and fifth season to introduce the Clarice character, but that was at the same time that show was coming out. So they just decided to end it,
Just end it. Yeah.
which
And
is
then
a
it,
smart move because you don't want to start going off on your own. Like I said, these are very complicated characters that have books that were done so well that you don't want to betray, and you don't want to start coming up with your own ideas,
right.
and your own ideas for these characters aren't going to be as good as what's already been done.
Right. Yeah, you have to really stay true to the source material. You're going to lose your audience, which many things do because they're just like way off in left field. It's like, well, I'm done with this. Yeah, because they had something with the source. Yeah, I'm going to have to read the book.
Characters, like I said, they're in the top hundreds of all time,
Yeah.
for a reason. If you're looking to actually create a strong female character, you don't have to look farther than Clarice.
She did a magnificent. I've always liked her as an actress. I always liked her as an actress. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
really
and
good.
she's done some tough roles. She's had, Taxi Driver had to be a tough role. She was
Mhm.
young. Um, then presumed innocent, not presumed innocent.
Well, that was a tough. That's
Yeah,
about the
that
raising the
pinball
woman
scenes, like,
daughter.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
she's had some tough roles, and she actually, had already won an award for her previous movie before this movie. So it's like
Mhm.
she was already, at the top of her game, and
Mhm.
she just nailed it again with this movie.
Yeah.
And like I said,
Yeah.
I couldn't see anyone else playing Clarice. Michelle Pfeiffer would have done good, and she would have done absolutely fine, but she wouldn't have brought the all around spectrum that we got from Jodie Foster.
But I think the casting was with Jodie Foster was spot on because she's an attractive woman, but not too attractive, and she has that subtle tone of masculinity with her Audrey has a friend who's like that. She's a girl, nice looking girl, but she has this subtext of mask it just ever so slight, and that's what I
Yeah,
think Jodie Foster had.
tomboyish kind of
Yeah, yeah, but
girl
ever
next
so
door.
right.
Ha,
That really that
had
really
like,
worked.
grew up as the only, girl in the family, and she had like, five brothers, where it's
Right,
like, she
right.
knows how to handle, being in a male dominated
Be able
area.
to hold her own. Yeah, we talked about this before with casting. Yeah, yeah. And casting is so important. You just have to get it right
Yeah, and
because
when talking about the castings, like the director, he had the story. It was like, when Michelle Pfeiffer turned it down, and like you were saying, I think she turned it down because she
the
didn't
money, yes, money thing.
money, but also probably the subject material. It's really dark. Um, when Jodie Foster came into the audition, she was already basically in character on walking down the hall. And the
Mm-hmm.
way she presented herself walking down the hall, the director immediately went and said,
Yeah, yeah.
she's
Right after
great
the
for it.
meeting, yeah, he's hired her. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And those auditions are important. We even had that what in Rocky, with the oh, man who played Apollo Creed, the way he acted in the sparring, and
oh
the
right, right.
attitude, it's like, and as soon as you walk in that door for that audition, be in character.
Be in character,
If
right,
you're sitting there in the waiting room, sit in that waiting room like that character is just sitting there.
right, right, right. Well,
Even
and you
if
mentioned
it
you have
might be
to
off-putting, you might be out there and you have to play an obnoxious character, and maybe you're obnoxiously, making some
right,
of those other people, but it's like,
right,
that might get you into that room faster because they always like, okay, let's get this person out of the way so everyone else can do their thing.
right,
But it's also going to show the director of things like he knows that character.
right. Well, it's just like meeting somebody who's having a bad day at work. It's like an actor. You don't know what happened before you open that door, so treat them as how they're portraying themselves. Uh, yeah, and just let them be in that moment, and that's what makes a true professional because we talked about birthing that character. That's something that's unique to them, and be there. You know, so they don't say, okay, now it's time to turn it on. You say you're on now when you walk in that door. Yeah,
Yeah, good.
yeah,
First impressions are always big. I
yeah.
mean, if you're dressed for the role, you might as well be acting for the role as soon
Mm-hmm.
as you have eyes on you.
Yeah, when you
Because
go to a job interview,
even the PAs that are calling people in and calling people out, sometimes they're PAs, sometimes they're screenwriting assistants, sometimes they're actually the casting director will come
well, yeah, they
out
could be
there.
plants, right? To kind of
There
get
are
an idea.
people that are going to have eyes on you that probably give information to, the director, the
Right.
producers, and casting agents
Yeah, the decision
that
makers,
actually
right?
have to, weight in what they say. It's like, what do you see out there? Do you see anyone out there that looks nervous, not ready for the role? It's like, well, that person's probably not going to crush it. If you
Right.
see someone out there doing something unique, that information is going to get relayed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's when you go to a job interview, dress for the job you're applying for. Construction worker, go construction. Lawyer, dress as, yeah. You have to be ready to go at a moment's notice.
Yeah, and that just shows how professional Jodie Foster was, and it shows how she's had such a long career as she has, and
Yeah,
how
doing the
she turned
research.
that into a fine director as well. You know,
Hmm.
um, so many other movies that just because she's in is just elevated. I what several years ago, it's probably a decade over a decade now. The Brave one,
I don't
you
see
know
that.
that one?
No, she directed it.
Where she's getting revenge over like a son's murder or something like that. She
Okay.
becomes like a vigilante. So good, so good. Well, that might be all the time we have. So, would you recommend this film?
Yes. Or 4 slices of pizza, or 5 slices of pizza.
No
Let's see, five
no
moths. 5 moths.
what kind of beans, and yeah, some kind of beans and
Oh,
Chianti.
fava beans, right? Fava beans.
Fava
The
beans and
Chianti.
Chiantis,
Chianti, yeah. Yeah. Great
Yeah,
movie.
I agree. Great movie. Of course it's, it's rated R, so it's like, it's very adult driven, Um, but if you have the opportunity and you're looking for those films to see before, you can't see anything else, do see this.
Highly recommend.
Such a great suspense thriller, such great characters, um, and always that reminder of a good teacher of respect. Be
Right,
respectful for everybody because you don't know who who
right.
that other
If you want
person is. He
right, if
might
you
be
want
Hannibal
respect, give
Lecter.
respect. Yeah, right, right. All right, my friend. We'll see you next year. Well, this is next year.
This is next year. Yeah, we'll see you next week. Make sure you
Next
tune
week.
in and we'll have a good episode for you as well.
Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, and what's the other one?
YouTube,
Apple. Yeah,
Apple as
YouTube.
well.
Yeah. All right, my friend.
All
Nice
right.
talking. Bye.